So,
All right.
Hi everyone. Welcome to the second session that I'm conducting, and this time I requested Sunil to help us with understanding on the issues that we will be having during our agile transformation and how do we spot it. So that's where the topic is about. And Sunil has needs no introduction, to be frank. He is known very well known in the community. So over to you, Sunil.
Well, thank you very, very much, Albert, for giving me this opportunity. I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking all the trouble to organize, to give it enough publicity on LinkedIn and arrange all the logistics. So heartfelt thanks to you. Uh, Also, thanks to everyone who has joined this webinar today. It really means a lot to me that there were so many registrations for this session, and I'm truly grateful that you're spending your precious time to attend this webinar today. So, without further ado, let's just begin. So just a little bit about me, although Albert very graciously mentioned that I don't need any introduction, but just to call out, I have total experience of about 30 plus years, 19 years in IT, and essentially I'm currently working in the space of agile transformation and leadership coaching as of now. And I have held leadership positions in IT organizations and other companies before I joined uh, the craft of agile transformation and coaching. And I have my MBA from the US, which has come into indirect play over my career, but much less relevant now at this stage of my career. In terms of thought leadership, I am the author of the book Enterprise Agility: Being Agile in a Changing World, bestseller on Amazon in 2 categories. And I'm passionate about sharing my knowledge at conferences, and fortunate enough to get the opportunity to have spoken at conferences across all the 6 continents. All right, so a couple of caveats before I begin. One is that this webinar is limited to, or the scope of this webinar is limited to team level smells. So I'm not going to talk about code smells or leadership smells or even enterprise level smells. Each of those is a separate topic in itself, which calls for a separate webinar for each. So I will only cover the team level smells in this one. And the second caveat is that I am assuming that the audience today is familiar with the basic concepts of Agile. So if I mention velocity, or if I mention product owner or Scrum Master, the assumption is that you are familiar with what I'm talking about. The third one, which I just thought about and I'm thinking and speaking at the same time, is this. I see a lot of experienced Agile practitioners on this webinar today, but I have prepared the content assuming a shoe level, which is a very basic learner level, given that there could be a lot of people who are not as experienced as many of us would be. So in case something sounds too basic to you, please forgive me for that, because that's the level which I have kept in mind while I prepared the content. Okay, so let's move. So what's a smell, right? A bad smell, when you have a bad smell, you essentially know that there's something wrong, there's something not right. And it's only a symptom, and that smell leads you to figuring out what or where the problem is. And essentially, when I'm talking of agile smells, it is this metaphor which I want to use, where you will get an indication of something which is not right. You will smell something, and then it's up to you to figure out what the root cause of that smell is. I mean, some smells are very obvious, like in real life, like when something's burning, we know something is burning. But when something is like a really bad smell, you don't know whether it's a dead animal or is it something else. Yeah. So for most smells, you really have to figure out where it is coming from and what could be the root cause, and you need to address that. The other bit about smell is that you can't mask it until or you can't mask it for very long. You have to take care of the underlying problem for the smell to go away. So just, if you have a bad smell and you spray a room freshener, you will cover it up for a while, but it won't go away until you solve the underlying problem. And the same applies for agile smells as well. So With that, let's go to some of the key smells which I have seen at the team level. First one is spilling over of user stories. So the principle is that you should be completing most of your user stories within a sprint or within an iteration, whatever terminology you wish to choose. Uh, and and commonly found sprint or iteration length is 2 weeks. Although at thoughtworks we deliver many projects even with 1 week sprints. We are able to slice those stories thinly, appropriately. But if you are consistently having stories spill over uh, into another sprint or the next sprint, then that is definitely a smell. All right. And what would be some of the probable reasons? Primarily these three in my view. One is user stories are too big. Now, user stories splitting is an art, and the principle is you have to adhere to the invest principle. I'm assuming you've heard of that. And the S part of the invest principle is keep the S as small as possible, or the story as small as possible, without breaking the invest principle. So splitting user stories is an art. It needs experience. We have come across situations where the client says it's just not possible for us to split the story, and we show them how. So I think this is something which has to be done with a lot of discipline, a lot of rigor, and a lot of skill. And when you don't do that, user stories become too big, and then they are spilling over into the next iteration. The anti-pattern which I have seen is that people close user stories halfway done, saying that story is done, and for the undone part of the user story, they create another user story in the next iteration. To me, that's a huge anti-pattern. So just for the sake of showing that you've done the story in the iteration, you are closing a story which is half done, which is absolutely absurd and not acceptable. The second reason is blockers and dependencies. So that really means that your story is stuck, and even though you had planned to finish that story ideally within whatever that iteration length may be, uh, the story is dragging because either it is blocked or there is a dependency on which you are waiting, which has not come. Therefore, there is no option but for the story to move over into the next iteration or sprint. And the last one on this is overcommitment. So team overcommits how much they can do, and you can only do as much as you can do, right? It's laws of physics that would apply here in terms of team's capacity. And whatever is the overcommitment, then that would definitely spill over into the next sprint or iteration. The next smell is erratic velocity. So this is again something which is not advisable, because velocity is, as we all know, is a good predictor of how much work has happened, and based on that, how much is possible to do within a given period of time, how much scope can you complete within a given iteration. So it gives you that predictability, and an erratic velocity absolutely does not help to have any sense of predictability about how soon or how late the work will get finished. Here are some reasons for that. First is it could be an estimation problem. What am I meaning by that? What I mean is that if you're doing relative sizing, if you don't have proper benchmarks for sizes, a 5-pointer could become a 1, a 1-pointer could become an 8. Those kind of things can happen. I'm giving you extremes, but I'll give an example which I encountered at a client, and essentially how do you validate whether that estimation is correct or not broadly is how we did it there. So the team at the client side was having the same problem. The velocity was quite erratic. It was up and down all over the place. So what I did was I tracked the cycle time of each story based on the size. So 1-pointers, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, all these stories, we tracked the cycle time and calculated the average cycle time for each of the story sizes. Logically, the cycle time for a 1-pointer should be shorter than the cycle time for a 2-pointer or a 3-pointer or a 5-pointer, right? As the story size increases, the cycle time should increase. How much, etc., that is not, doesn't matter. Whether it is proportional or not, that also does not matter. But what got us alarming was that the cycle times were also all over the place, which means that some 5-pointer stories were taking as less as maybe a 3-pointer, and some 3-pointers were taking as high as an 8-pointer story cycle time. So that's when we realized that the team does not have proper estimation benchmarks. And when we sort of put that in place, when the team was educated on what really a 1-pointer is, 2, 3 is, and how do you compare stories against those benchmarks, that problem was resolved, and then the cycle time fell in line with the size of the story. So it was all about educating the team on estimation and establishing benchmarks for estimation. The other one for erratic velocity is capacity leakages. Now, this could be because of either defect fixes, which obviously you're not supposed to count towards your velocity. And if those defects are coming at very infrequent frequencies, or unpredictable amount of defects coming into a sprint, then that could be also causing your leakage in your velocity. There could be also unplanned work. Some stakeholder comes and says, hey, can you just do this for me? And that's not something which is as part of the backlog to be delivered. Then that's again a capacity leakage, which will impact your velocity, because you count your velocity only on your user stories which you have committed for the iteration or which you have actually done, not for some work which your boss has asked to do, which is not part of the backlog. The next one is about the team being unstable. And what do I mean by this? Many people have, or many organizations have teams which are having people who do multitasking or are part of multiple teams. So you spend a little bit of time here, a little bit of time there. That's not predictable. Sometimes people are pulled out for firefighting, and that impacts the capacity of the team as well. So this is again a consideration to keep in mind to understand why the velocity is erratic. So if you are going to be having people move in and out of the team and not contributing towards the backlog, then that is going to impact your velocity, and that can make the velocity erratic. The next one is a low say-do ratio. I'm sure you're familiar with what the say-do ratio is. How many points have you committed to deliver within a sprint or an iteration, and how many have you actually done? And this ratio should be close to your commitment. I mean, not exactly all the time, but very, very close. And if it is consistently low, that is a smell. Some of the underlying problems could be this. Again, leakage on capacity through rework. So you've committed to delivering stories based on your capacity, understanding that you would be working on new functionalities. But if you have to spend time on rework, which is essentially defect fixes or stories moving back and forth because of lack of clarity, whatever, then that is going to impact your actual deliverable in terms of what you can complete and get it done. The other problem which I often see is that teams just do not have an idea of the capacity. And again, that can happen for reasons like one is of course erratic velocity, where team really cannot say how much they would be able to do. But the other problem that can happen when a team does not have a good idea of their capacities when you do not strictly follow relative sizing. When 1 story points becomes 1 day and 2 story points become 2 days, you are really not going to get a good idea of your capacity, because you can anyway calculate your team size and multiply by 40 hours or number of days, and that's what it is. But it doesn't work like that. All right. So often the team just does not have an idea of their true capacity, the true velocity that they need to achieve, and therefore they end up under delivering to the commitment. And the last but not the least is external pressure, where the bosses are always saying deliver more, deliver more. So to fend the bosses off, you take on more commitment, you thinking that you would do, instead of 8 hours, try to work 12, 14 hours a day and try and do more. And that pressure can again cause a low say-do ratio, because it's not just about working, putting in extra hours that you'll be able to get done. There's so many things that need to happen for a story to be completed, including dependencies, etc. And that external pressure actually becomes counterproductive. The next one is about a specific team member or team members becoming a bottleneck for the team. And the underlying causes could be that there is a silo within the team. So the team is not working as a team which is really collaborating towards achieving a common outcome. There could be a lot of the times, and pardon me, I don't mean to single out a role, but this is the common anti-pattern which I've seen, is where architects are often, even when they are part of the team, they become like silos and there's a lot of dependency on them. Sometimes there is a dependency on the tech lead, also for some technical decisions. So if there are these kind of silos within the team, then that is a problem. That dependency is there. The other part, hello, can you mute yourself, please?
Yes, continue. I have no.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks. The other bit is about the hierarchy within the team. Now the team is not supposed to have a hierarchy. It's supposed to be a self-organizing team. But many times we see that there's a project manager or a scrum master who behaves like a project manager, and often approvals are needed from this type of a person, and that person can then become a bottleneck. Imagine if that person goes on leave or something like that, then you're creating a lot of bottlenecks there. The last one is again related to capacity, but in terms of inadequate capacity. So the ratios of the skills that you need within a team are, if they are not adequate, then you are creating dependency on a person, what we call a, where you really, that person just becomes a bottleneck. So I have seen teams where there is a lot of work to be done, but there's only one BA allocated to the team. And also sometimes just one tester or one quality analyst for a large group of developers. So these kind of things can become a bottleneck. Sometimes a specialist skills are needed, right? For a security expert or a UX expert. If those skills are not available within the team or that capacity is inadequate, then again, that can become a bottleneck for the team. And then individuals become bottlenecks for the team, which is not advisable. The next one is excess WIP, work in progress. And the potential root causes for excess WIP are, again, one is overcommitment. So obviously you're not going to finish what you agreed to commit, which means that will be left as work in progress and seen as work in progress as well. Second is blockers and dependencies. This is pretty obvious that when something is blocked and when something is dependent on someone and they don't meet the commitment on time, then that will remain as work in progress until that blocker is removed or the dependency is resolved. And the last one is mid-sprint priority change. And this is something which perplexes me quite a bit, right? People are today not even willing to wait 2 weeks or whatever that sprint length might be to change a priority. I have often seen instances where the PO or some senior business stakeholder comes to the team and say, hey, park that story, this is more urgent, start working on this. And half done work is parked. Again, that remains work in progress as well, which then sometimes remains as work in progress for multiple sprints, just getting carried over without somebody making a decision to deprioritize it, drop it, whatever that needs to be done. So half done work getting carried over just because some other priorities come in due to either the PO changing priorities or unfortunately some external stakeholders coming and changing priorities for the team, then that can cause a lot of work in progress, which we all know is a waste because work in progress carries a cost with it. The next one is frequent unplanned work. So you commit to something and then suddenly the team realizes that They're not able to work on the backlog fully. There's a lot of unplanned work that's coming in. Some of the reasons is this: team is unable to push back. Yeah. So I give the analogy here of a bucket full of water, right? Assuming that the bucket is filled to the brim, which is what the team capacity would be, and the team, assuming the team has committed to that capacity to deliver. If you have to add a mug of water to that bucket, what's going to happen? Without taking out anything out from the bucket, yeah, something is going to spill over. Okay, so that's a problem. So the right thing for the team to do is to push back and say, if you want to add one mug of water, first you have to take out one mug so that you create space to add one more. And often the teams are not able to push back on this. And when they don't push back, and when they take that extra work, right, this is exactly what happens. The next one is about PO not being effective, meaning that uh, PO is essentially not able to handle uh, the other stakeholders who are there, the other business stakeholders who are there, and stop them from giving unplanned work to the team. Often we see there are many senior business stakeholders who would just override the PO, and the PO essentially is a hapless, powerless type of a person or a role which is there, which is not able to protect the team from this unplanned work which is thrown at them. And the last one is people working across teams. And again, this when this happens, right? Sometimes people switch, sometimes people stay within the team, but do some other teams work. Then that can again cause work which is unplanned, which is coming into the team, which is a leakage on the team's capacity. So yeah, and unplanned work will have consequences in terms of how much you can deliver to your commitments. The next one is defects. Often we ask clients, what is your problem that you have? And the clients say, no, we have a lot of defects. Defects is a smell, defect is a symptom for me. And it could have multiple reasons, but the top three in my experience are these. First one, the frozen iron triangle. Okay. So the iron triangle, for those who are not familiar, is the triangle of time, cost, and scope. Those who are doing project management or those who have done some PMI certification will be very well aware of this. The rule says that you can only keep two variables fixed and one has to be variable. So if your time and cost is fixed, your scope must be variable. Okay. So, but often what happens is this iron triangle gets fixed. So your time is fixed, your cost and capacity is fixed, and your scope is fixed. And we all know that software development is type of work where it is a complex work where you will always discover some additional complexity as and when you start working on it. And when that happens, and that is the reason why initial estimates often need to be revised. But when you don't have flexibility to do that, the variable which suffers is quality. And this is such a common problem that I have come across, and it's very unfortunate. I have seen project managers pushing out software because there is a deadline, knowing that there are defects, saying, oh, we'll see when the customer finds it out, we'll fix it at that time. Right now, we don't have the bandwidth to fix it. Obviously, that's going to come back as a defect. And we all know defect is not just a defect in terms of just fixing that defect and identifying it. There is a whole life cycle to a defect, which means you have to log it into a defect tracking system. Then you have to decide who does it belong to. It becomes a hot potato. Often the operations team says it's not my problem. The development team says that's not my problem. It works on my machine. All those kind of things happen. Then impact analysis, then fixing, then retesting, and then release into production. It's such a waste. Okay. So people don't realize this, but yet they fix the iron triangle, knowing that quality is going to take a hit, but they're still okay with it. I can't understand how. The next big one is lack of engineering practices. I can say this with immense pride and with conviction that we at ThoughtWorks take a lot of pride in implementing engineering practices, which include unit testing, trust-driven development, continuous integration, continuous delivery, all those kind of things. And we do it with such rigor that for us, having a defect or a defect comeback is like really something which is like really wrong. It's just something which shakes us. I'm proud to say I'm in Singapore right now. We have delivered projects to Singapore government which are absolutely defect free. Why? Many reasons, but the primary reason is rigor in engineering practices. And this is something which I am seeing missing in many teams which are adopting Agile. For many teams, it's all about Scrum. You do Scrum means you're Agile. No, not really. Unless you have good technical agility, your agility, whatever you have, will not be sustainable. I mean, let me stick out my neck and say this with full conviction. So engineering practices, lack of it is a major reason why defects happen, but they are solvable. If you follow good engineering, they can be prevented. And last but not the least is poorly defined acceptance criteria. So again, this is all about not thinking of those scenarios, agreeing with the product owner and with the tester on what the boundary conditions for the user stories are, specifying very clearly what action, when it is taken, what should exactly happen, what acceptance criteria we are not going to build, and they are not to be tested because they are edge cases. I think it's all about having that rigor around defining acceptance criteria, which is important. And in my experience, when you have poorly defined acceptance criteria, that's when a lot of defects crop up. The next one is the ceremonies take too long. You've seen stand-ups are supposed to have finished within 15 minutes. Often they go on to 30, whatever, 40 minutes every day. Retros are supposed to be like finished very quickly within 1 hour. Sometimes that meeting goes on for a couple of hours. Sprint planning meetings go on for a very long period of time. You take any of these things, right? It is very unfortunate to see. And then especially when you do these over conference calls, people are joining from multiple countries. Truly, these ceremonies then get it to a point where there's a lot of wastage of time and people check out mentally from these meetings, and that's really not a good sign. So what could be some of the reasons for this to happen? First, of course, is a lack of discipline, right? Taking an example of a stand-up, you can have people who can come and ramble out there, but can the team have, somebody in the team have the courage to say, time out, can we discuss this offline? How do you keep that conversation crisp? Either you talk about the story if you're doing walk the wall kind of a stand-up, or if you are answering those 3 questions, how do you give the team just enough information and say that, yes, I have a problem, but I would like to discuss it offline? So this temptation of talking a little bit more, thinking that it's not going to make a difference if I speak for 1 minute more, that is the problem, and that is discipline which is missing. If that discipline is missing, it does not take too long for ceremonies to just spill over and go into a lot of time or overrun time for which they were allocated and budgeted. One of the key things which happens when ceremonies extend beyond the stipulated time is that it implies that the team is waiting for the ceremonies to have the conversation. So nobody's just getting up and having conversations throughout the day. When you do that, when you see a problem and you try to resolve it, then it will not all pile up for a stand-up meeting or for a showcase or for a retro. So this is a communication problem within the team that one needs to look into, whether there is a communication, whether people are talking regularly. As soon as there's an issue, why can't just somebody go and walk over to somebody and try and solve that? If we are waiting for the next stand-up meeting to raise an issue, to me, that's a huge anti-pattern. And if that happens, then obviously your stand-ups, etc., and other meetings are going to be delayed beyond the stipulated time. The next one is not understanding the why behind the ceremonies. So if this is another problem, many teams say, oh, we are doing all the ceremonies and we are therefore agile. But the point is, when you're not getting results, when despite doing those ceremonies, you still are ending up with the outcomes which are not improved, then you have to ask the why. And when the why is really not clear, that's when people don't know exactly what to say, how much to say, and stop and listen. And that's when a lot of people end up speaking a lot more when they are not clear about what is the outcome to be achieved. And this is one of the reasons also why ceremonies go beyond the stipulated time. The next one is very interesting. When you talk to team members, they use I more than we. So watch out for this, right? When somebody in the team says, I think it is this, sure. I mean, there will be obviously be occasions when, you're doing something individually and you will use the word I. But watch out for decisions which actually should come from the team, uh, like uh, in terms of the achievement or the outcome, but somebody is saying I instead of we when actually it should be the we. And the underlying reasons could be this. One is obviously a lack of bonding within the team. So you don't identify with the team as a unit. You still see yourself as a separate entity from the team, which is more important than the team itself. And clearly it shows when you talk about it in terms of I rather than we. The second one, which we already discussed, is silos in the team. So when you have a silo, obviously there is no question of talking as a we. It's going to be just I. And let's remember this, folks. I have again seen organizations where management wants to follow co-location. So they have read somewhere that our team has to be co-located. What they are doing is essentially taking some roles and putting them in one room, believing that that group of people will become a team. Let us clearly distinguish between a group of people not being a team. For a group of people to become a team, it needs a lot more to happen. There needs to be bonding, there needs to be willingness to be vulnerable, there needs to be a little bit of uh, uh, concern for each other in terms of how I can help my other team members succeed if they are struggling. And most importantly, there needs to be trust within the team. So a group of people automatically does not become a team. And especially when you have silos and when you cobble up people together and think that they are a team just because they are co-located, it doesn't work that way. And silos continue. So the BA reports to a separate boss, the QA reports to a separate boss, all those kind of things happen. And even when people are sitting next to each other, they are sending emails because, yeah, I told you, you want that proof later on, right? That's the silo, and therefore the I bit will come. And the last but not the least, which is actually an organization level problem most of the time, is that you reward individual performance. You reward individual heroics. Your performance appraisal is based on your own individual performance, and it's mostly with the boss to decide how you have performed as an individual, rather than your performance being tied to the team outcome. Then it is again more about the I than the we. So some smells which I have not covered in the interest of time in details, but I still want all of us to watch out for are these. One is Scrum Master allocating the work to the team. Well, no, it should actually ideally be a self-organizing team who amongst themselves decide what works needs to be picked up. So when this happens, the Scrum Master then essentially becomes the quote unquote the boss of the team. And you'll see that in stand-up meetings when people speak, they are supposed to address the whole team, but they will look at that only one individual scrum master or project manager and speak only to that individual. So this boss mentality comes in, and allocating work by one individual, be it a tech lead or be it a scrum master or some such person allocating work, is a smell, and that should be avoided. The other one is, this is again funny, relentless increase in velocity. So a team is constantly showing that their velocity is increasing every sprint for a long period of time. This is just not sustainable. This is when a team is given a mandate that some boss comes and says, I want you to show 20% improvement in your productivity every sprint. All right. And when you do that, what happens? A one-pointer story becomes a two-pointer, a two-pointer becomes a five-pointer. And your output is really the same, but your velocity graph will always keep on increasing. Again, this does not give you a sense of predictability, a sense of true capacity of the team. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding of velocity when people set a velocity increase targets, right? To me, a velocity is something like the altitude of a flight. Okay. So flight, when it takes off, yes, it has not hit peak velocity, and the same is with the team. So when a new team starts off, it will take on an average 3 iterations plus minus one, usually, to reach their optimal velocity. And after that, it should be a fairly stable line. Of course, there are exceptions and there are holidays and all those things happen. But if you remove all those variations, then your velocity should be quite stable, which gives you a good sense of predictability. But when you are seeing your velocity increase after increase after increase, every sprint, including in the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, 10th sprint of the team being together, that's a smell that you need to watch out for, because that's just not sustainable. It's like saying, a plane can fly at 35,000 feet, but you expect the plane to climb 5,000 feet every hour till it reaches the destination. Not possible, right? The plane has a capacity to only be at 35, and it will cruise at 35. That's how the team should be. And the last but not the least is chickens distracting meetings. So I hope many of you have heard the story of pigs and chickens. If you have not, please look it up. But in summary, pigs are really the core producers of the team, the core members of the team. Chickens are the external stakeholders to the team. And many times it can happen that these external stakeholders show up during meetings and hijack the conversation and speak. And because they are senior or they are bosses, nobody has the guts to stop them when they are speaking. And they just come and distract the whole meeting, and the whole meeting becomes pointless. So watch out for these things. Chickens should, first of all, the issue is whether the chicken should attend the meeting or not. And I think, again, the team needs to decide on which meetings they can attend, which they cannot, what it is. But ideally, the rule is, yeah, if the meeting is with the core team, unless the chicken is invited, that's fine. Like, for example, in a showcase, you would invite some chickens, and if they speak, that's okay. But a stand-up meeting, a retrospective meeting, it's very, very easy to get those meetings derailed when chickens speak. So be very careful about having chickens speak too much, in meetings where they're actually not supposed to speak. Okay. So in terms of takeaways, right? What are the 2 or 3 key takeaways that I would want you to go away with from today's session? First is create an awareness of smells. Most people don't even know that something is wrong until it really hits them, and therefore it is important that the agile coach or the scrum master, whoever is within the team, lists out these smells, discusses them, and creates awareness within the team. I think that's really important. The second is, how do we recognize and address them early? Because it's like, the later you address it, the more difficult it is going to be for you to fix it. That's really the source of truth for anything that goes wrong. Is the later you discover it, the more difficult it gets to fix. So how can we recognize this early and then address them early as well? And by address, I mean identifying the underlying problem. Don't mask that smell thinking that it will go away. It will usually not. Again, don't overreact as well. So if you see like a velocity drop within one iteration, don't just conclude that that velocity is erratic. It's not. You got to see a little bit of a trend. But how long and before it is too late, that is a situational call that you will need to make. Okay. There are some instances where you'll have to douse that smell early. It's like a fire. You can't wait to whatever. But for some things, like as I said, like a velocity, you might want to wait it out for 1 or 2 sprints or iterations to see whether that is truly being erratic or not. And the last but not the least to remember is, the onus of recognizing these smells should not be only with the scrum master or the project manager or the agile coach. I think the culture has to be such that anyone within the team should be able to say, wait a minute, I think something is going wrong here. Okay. And should be able to call out that smell with courage, with conviction. And I think that is the culture that I think we need to bring within the team, rather than say, that's not my problem. It's the scrum master's job or it's the project manager's job to identify a smell and fix it. If that is the attitude within the team, that itself then is a smell. Right. That's it. Thank you very much. And now we have some time for questions.
Right. So there are some questions, very interesting questions has been posted. Um,
Sure.
so
Just take water.
Rudra is asking, is there is any suggestions which smell can be discussed at a team level and which one at an individual level? Any few examples would be helpful.
Um, so individual smells are more about collaboration and communication. All right. Individual smells are about hoarding of information. Okay, those two, three examples come to my mind as individual level smells. Okay, it's about giving the boss's work more priority than the team's work. That's again an individual smell to some extent. So in my mind, yeah, those are some information of individual or some examples of individual level smells.
The next question is on the rewarding. Can
Mhm.
rewards rewarding individuals or the team? Uh, so using the lean matrices like throughput, the cycle time, and other things, how
Mhm.
useful it is, or how it can help us to reward someone or the team.
See, I think uh, we need to understand that recognition and reward uh, need not be mixed up and can be two separate things. Okay, reward is something which is should be linked to an outcome. So it does not mean you don't measure activity and outputs. Obviously, you do, right? But the point is, and rewards are not just in terms of your pay raise. Rewards are in terms of behaviors also. So
Okay.
let's look at recognition, and I'll address the rewards bit after this. Recognition should first come from uh, the team members themselves. Okay, which means that I'm sure in a crisis there'll be somebody who will step up, there'll be somebody who will perform a little bit more than others and give that extra bit, and truly do an exceptional job in under those circumstances. If the team recognizes that and subsequently the leadership or the management recognizes that, then that's a good thing. Okay, but what happens is when a individual is recognized by an external entity as a hero, it becomes a zero sum game. Why? Because when that individual is treated as an outperformer or an exceptional performer or a winner, it means that the rest of the team are automatically considered as not performed or as losers. It's a zero sum game usually, right? So we have to be very careful in terms of not rewarding individual heroics, but at the same time making sure that that additional effort or that additional uh, uh, the time, the energy which that person has put in to really make contribute to the success of the team is recognized by the team and then subsequently by the organization.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to rewards, let's keep the financial rewards bit separate. Let's look at rewarding behaviors. Right. Now, this is again based on what you measure. It's so important. I mean, I'm sure many of you have read the book called The Goal. And the famous statement in that book is, tell me how you will measure me, and I will tell you how I will behave. Okay? Let us take an example. Let us say that Albert is a developer and I am a tester. And let us say that for me, my productivity or my performance is based on the number of defects I find after the code is checked in. Mind you, it's still not gone live, it's still within the team. But as a tester, my productivity is based on finding defects. Now, let's say Albert finishes a piece of functionality and he says, hey, Sunil, can you come to my desk and just check whether this is broadly all right or not? What am I thinking in my mind? Oh my God, if I tell him this defect right now, he will fix it. Then what will I find when the story comes to me, right? So we have to really see, are we rewarding the wrong behaviors and are we punishing the right behaviors? And for me, that reward and punishment with behaviors is far more important than rewarding people financially. I think financial rewards is a separate thing altogether that depends on your company's performance, the team performance, the customer outcomes. There's a bunch of variables you can consider while deciding rewards. And within that also, you can then identify outperformers and give them that extra bit of financial reward.
Okay.
But for me, the bigger concern is the behavioral rewards.
Okay. So when we started with the story point benchmarking.
Yeah.
They were asking about. Can you please elaborate more on that?
All right. So story point benchmarking is this. Let us take an example of fruits, okay? Because I like to give metaphors which makes things easy. Okay. Let us say we have three sizes of fruits, just like we have story sizes. Let's say we have a grape, we have an orange, and we have a watermelon. Okay. You have these three sizes. Clear to everyone? Everybody can relate to these three sizes. Okay. Now let's say I bring up a papaya and I say, okay, put it in any of these three buckets. So you'll say papaya is not as small as a grape and is definitely bigger than an orange. So it belongs to the watermelon bucket. So watermelon and papaya are fairly similar, right? So you'll put it there. Suppose I bring a cherry. You'll say, yeah, the cherry looks as small as a grape, so I'll put it there. This is what I mean by story baselining, so that you identify stories which are typical size of 1 pointer, 2 pointer, 3 pointer, 5 pointer, etc. And when a new story comes in, you will check in terms of the complexity of that story. Does it belong to a 2 pointer or a 3 pointer or a 5 pointer or an 8 pointer? Okay. And if it's falling somewhere in between, you normally, I tend to say that take the higher side of it. Yeah, because you just want to make sure that you're not cutting yourself short. So that's the example which I wanted to give in terms of how you would size a fruit. When you have created those three buckets, you would create these buckets of stories with a sample story there to give you an idea of the complexity. And then when you're comparing stories, you will compare it against that sample or the benchmark story.
Right. I think we have time for another three more questions we can have. The next question I want to, or they're asking is, in many places, old role BAs are just getting mapped to new role. Thoughts on blind role mapping?
Um, See, this is just it's like, yeah, as they give an example, it's like putting lipstick on a pig.
Okay.
That's the common terminology which is used. The pig remains a pig,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So you have to see the whole premise of requirements is completely different. You are moving from a 500-page FRS document, a big bang thing, to thin slicing. You are moving to requirements where the user stories intentionally kept vague in the beginning. This is such a big mindset change as compared to how you do traditional requirements, right? So
Yeah.
you have to upskill your BAs to have conversations, to be comfortable with that initial vagueness, to not jump into solutioning so that the team can creatively think of solutions and take multiple options to the product owner, based on which then a product owner can take a call based on cost benefit analysis to see which solution is acceptable. So it requires a completely different mindset, a completely different skill set. So just labeling, an old BA as a new BA, and a BA to me, I mean, every role is important within the team. But why the BA role is even more important? Because if you go wrong upstream, the downstream is going to be wrong. And remember, the user story is the primary unit of work.
Yes.
If you are not able to craft your user stories properly and successively, progressively elaborate them and set the boundaries and set the acceptance criteria for user stories properly, you are bound to mess up down the line. No question about it.
Okay. Okay. So the next one is interesting one. Will too much of time or effort spent in getting matrices, evaluation of each iteration progress, can be an agile smell?
Yes, it can be. So you really need to understand why you're using those matrices for. Is it to point blame, or are you doing it for improvement? But then you're getting into analysis paralysis, right? There is always an optimal level. What is the point in getting so much into perfection where it's just one data point in your journey of product development? So for that one data point, how much are you going to fuss over? Okay. The example which I'll again give is this. Uh, uh, my daughter is now grown up, but even when she was small and in kindergarten, I still remember going to school. And pardon me, I don't mean anything towards any gender or whatever it is, but okay, I'll make it gender neutral. I have seen parents fight with teachers saying, hey, why did my kid get 98.5 marks? Yeah, here is that half mark which is missing. God, I mean, imagine that child is in kindergarten and you're going and fighting with the teacher for that half extra mark on some subject, right? Is it really worth it? Is it really going to matter in the lifetime of the child, or even in the next standard that the child is going to? So we have to keep that perspective. Why are we doing this? Right? What is the outcome that you want from it? Is it even worth it? Second point, yeah, metrics should ideally come out of tools. If you're taking a lot of data and doing something in Excel sheets, etc., that's an anti-pattern. Again, that leaves scope for a lack of better word, massaging the metrics or manipulating the metrics, which again is not acceptable. Metrics have to be system driven largely and very transparent. So anybody who's within the team and outside the team should get a same view at any point in time, right? There should not be any multiple versions of that metrics.
Okay.
So
Okay. So how do we factor defects if a team is estimating in story points and
yeah,
the team is also having defects and the stories in the same
yeah,
sprint, in the sprint?
yeah. That's a very common and a very interesting problem. So I think it's a problem where um, you really have to watch out for a trend of defects. One thing which I have seen teams do is, or rather two things, they can handle it both ways. So when you see over a period of time that, and you track how much time you're spending on fixing defects versus how much time the team has spent on functionality, and look at that ratio. So let's say your ratio is about 80/20. Then and if your velocity is actually reflecting that, then you don't need to do anything. Okay. But the point is, if you are calculating your velocity on the entire team's capacity, and then you know that roughly about 20% of your uh, uh, time of the team is going on fixing defects, then you would need to make appropriate adjustment to your velocity projection based on the trend of what percentage roughly is going into defect fixing. The other thing which I have seen is that teams carve out a certain capacity that, and by rotation, of course, that these two people for this sprint will be responsible for fixing defects. Again, that's a good sign if you can do that, because that means your code is, there is common ownership of code and anybody can fix any defect. It's not tied to a particular developer. And if there are no defects, then those people contribute to building new functionality, which then means that you will actually over deliver. Yeah, you will take on more work if for example, assuming that there is no defect which has come into the sprint, which is good. But yeah, in terms of planning, uh, you really need to look at the trend of the defect and see what percentage of your capacity has gone towards fixing it, and then plan appropriately.
Okay. The next one, I have an interesting one. Is there any scaled agile smells?
Uh, for me, agile is about descaling. Right? What you scale in agile is you scale communication, you scale collaboration, you scale visibility, you scale transparency. Okay, I have I have not studied any scaling frameworks, and I do not have any certifications whatsoever related to scaling. So for me, agile is about descaling. It's as Peter Merrill said, and I've quoted him in my book. Agile is not a big elephant. Yeah. So you don't want to scale to become something that big. Agile should be like a pod of dolphins. Yeah.
Okay.
Small, very nimble. And so your team should be such that they are able to deliver working software. And obviously you need that layer which will tie it up. But I have not studied these frameworks to call out smells on them.
Okay. So, what motivates an agile team, and what are all motivation smells that you know of?
So motivation, what really motivates is the Daniel Pink's theory, in my view. I don't know how many people have heard of him,
The
but
drive.
he wrote a book called Drive, which I would urge all of you to read.
Yeah.
And there's a YouTube video also as a short one where he talks about these three intrinsic motivators. So the focus has to be on intrinsic motivators, and those three motivators are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Okay, autonomy means I have the freedom to do what I need to do given the outcome that you need to achieve. Of course, it doesn't mean unlimited freedom, but within a framework, you have the freedom to do it. Mastery, this is playing on human nature. So you really have to hire people who are passionate about their craft. This is, I see, a huge problem in IT industry in general, where people have joined the IT industry not for the love of coding, but because either there is no job available or because it pays more than some other jobs. But they hate coding, they don't like it at all, but they're doing it. So there is no question of then mastery. You will try to master something only when you're passionate about your craft. And this is what we in ThoughtWorks, I can proudly say, we test. We test your passion. It's not just about how good you are, but are you passionate? Because when people are passionate about what they do, you don't need people to tell them, or you don't need people to push them to do something. They will actually care about doing that and care about doing it really, really well. They will take pride in doing their work. Okay, so that's the mastery bit. And the last but not the least is purpose. Okay, purpose means that if I can see how my work is contributing to a larger outcome, be it customer satisfaction or be it the organization's objectives, if I can connect my piece of work to that outcome, that motivates me. And anything contrary to this, contrary to a smell on motivation, is a bell curve, okay, within organizations.
Okay.
Because suppose the last 10% of the bell curve will go on PIP or a pay freeze or even a layoff, then my whole goal is that I don't want to be in that last 10%. Yeah. For that, what I will do, I can do two things. I can do very, very well and try to be in the top 90%, or I can try and pull some subordinates down so that they are in the 10%, so that I am not in that 10%.
Okay.
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 So that's an antibiotic.
Okay. This would be the last question, and let's keep it a little bit because this itself can be a full webinar. The question itself, a
Sure.
team is having a X capacity, but then at the end of the day, they just completed X by 2 capacity. Okay. The question is, how can we optimize the team capacity? I know this is itself is a webinar topic. Uh,
Yeah.
Quick thoughts
I
on
think
that.
Yeah. I think there are multiple reasons, right? So you really need to understand why that capacity fell. When the team delivered X by 2, what is the root cause? Is it dependencies? Is it blockers? Is it lack of skills? Is it lack of tools? There could be many, many reasons which could be impeding the team's capacity. But often it is dependencies and blockers and skill sets. Yeah, people, maybe there's a lot of new people joining the team and they yet to come up the curve and all of that. So upskilling people, getting them to the optimal skill level, and dependencies and blockers. I think these are the two main reasons for me to look at, to optimize, to get to a team capacity optimization.
Okay. Okay. Uh, is it okay to take one more question?
I have no
I think
problem. I can stay on for
Tamisha
till.
is waiting for a long time. So let me give him an opportunity to ask. 1 second. Let me unmute him so that he
Sorry,
can.
who's this?
1 second. Yeah, Tamichati, you can ask your question. Yeah.
Yeah, hi Sunil, I'm Krishna here.
Hi.
So I've been working in Agile world for the last 4 years, but not experienced much in that. But currently, we have one challenge that we have worked on waterfall model in terms of collecting the requirements, requirement gathering, and we are converting that requirement gathering into SRS document, FSD document. And later, the management has changed the direction and asked us to convert those into user stories and
Mm-hmm.
need to deliver from a agile way. So how does these two models will coexist, collecting the requirements in waterfall model and development is doing in a agile world?
Yeah.
So I'm a bit confused, so I just
Yeah.
wanted to emphasize on this.
Yeah. So that is called as Vagile. Okay, waterfall and agile. Uh, just like Scrum Fall. Okay, there is a Vagile as well. So it's a recipe for failure. It's a train wreck. And my full empathy is for you people. I think again, this management thing which bothers me, that you want to just checkbox saying we have done agile either to prove to a customer or to whoever it is, right? But at the end, you will actually doing something half-hearted will leave you in a bigger mess. If I have to choose really a less worse option, it will be to continue with waterfall. Don't try and mix waterfall and agile. It will leave the team really confused. That's my personal stand.
And with that, let's finish for today. And we will catch up in the next one. I'm also talking with someone for DevOps. They're working out on a database or data first DevOps. I will announce it soon. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thank you for your support and hope you had a great time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.